Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the stars through the main window. His crew was doing their usual patrol around the outer edge of human space when Lieutenant Amy Carter called out from her station. "Captain, we are getting a distress signal," she said, looking at her screen with a confused expression. "Actually, sir, we are getting dozens of them." Jake walked over to her station and looked at the readings. The signals were coming from just outside their patrol zone in what should have been empty space. "Any idea what kind of ships are sending these signals, Amy?" "No, sir. The signals are weak and broken, but there are definitely multiple ships out there," Amy replied as she tried to clean up the transmission. "Wait, sir, I think I can make out some words now." The bridge fell silent as a voice came through the speakers. The words were spoken in a language none of them recognized, but the universal translator began working on it. "Please help us, we have nowhere else to go," came the translated voice. "Our people have cast us out and we are dying in the void." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Cast out meant these were refugees, and from the sound of it they were in serious trouble. "Set course for those signals," he ordered, "and get me a full sensor sweep of the area." The ship turned toward the distress signals, and within an hour they could see what was waiting for them. Jake had seen many things in his 20 years with the Earth Defense Fleet, but nothing had prepared him for this sight. Floating in the darkness of space were hundreds of massive ships. They were not warships or cargo vessels, but something Jake had never seen before. They looked like entire cities had been built inside ship hulls. "My God," whispered Dr. Ben Rodriguez, the ship's medical officer, as he joined Jake on the bridge. "Those ships must be holding millions of beings. Get me a communication channel with the nearest ship," Jake ordered. Within minutes, a face appeared on the main screen that made everyone on the bridge step back in surprise. The being on the screen was clearly from the Zephyrian race. Jake had met Zephyrians before at diplomatic meetings, and they were known throughout the galaxy as perfect warriors. They stood 7 feet tall with shining scales and powerful builds that made them feared in battle. But this Zephyrian was different. She was smaller than the others Jake had met, and her scales were dull gray instead of the bright silver he expected. Scars covered her face and arms, and one of her eyes was missing. "I am Kethva, leader of the 19th Outcasting Fleet," she said through the translator. "You are humans, are you not?" "Yes, I am, Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Fleet," Jake replied, trying to hide his shock at her appearance. "We received your distress signals. What kind of help do you need?" Kethva lowered her head in what Jake recognized as shame among her people. "We need sanctuary, Captain Morrison. We have been cast out from our homeworld and sentenced to die in the void. We have been traveling for months and our supplies are running low." "Cast out," Jake repeated. "Why were you cast out?" "Because we are flawed," Kethva said the word like it tasted bitter in her mouth. "The Zephyrian High Council declared us genetically impure. Some of us were born smaller than the standard. Others have scars from battles or missing limbs. Some think differently than what is considered proper for our race." Jake felt anger building in his chest. He had heard rumors that some alien races had strict rules about genetic purity, but he had never seen it firsthand. "How many ships do you have out there?" 412 ships carrying nearly 2 million Zephyrians who have been deemed unfit for society," Kethva replied. "But Captain Morrison, we are not the only ones. The Galactic Council has ordered all member races to cast out their impure members. There are fleets like ours from all 12 council races drifting in space with nowhere to go." The bridge fell completely silent. Jake looked around at his crew and saw the same horror on their faces that he felt in his heart. 2 million beings from just one race had been thrown away like garbage, and there were 11 more races doing the same thing. "Amy, get me a full scan of this entire sector," Jake ordered. "I want to know how many ships are really out here." The next few hours brought one shock after another. Amy's scans revealed over 3,000 ships scattered across a vast area of space. Ships from the crystal-like Luxari race carrying beings whose light was too dim. Ships from the insect-like Thektar holding those whose hive-mind connection was too weak. Ships from the machine-like Corvin race filled with those whose bodies had broken down or been built differently. Jake stood in his ready room later that evening talking with his senior officers. Dr. Rodriguez had been studying the medical data from the refugee ships, and his report was grim. "Jake, these people are dying," he said, shaking his head. "They have been surviving on emergency rations for months. Medical supplies are almost gone and their ships are breaking down. At the rate they are losing people, we are looking at millions of deaths in the next few weeks." "What about the council races?" asked Lieutenant Commander Rick Davis Jake's second in command. Surely they will not just let all these people die. Amy looked up from her tablet where she had been reviewing communications intercepts. Actually, sir, that is exactly what they plan to do. I picked up a transmission from the Altarian Empire to all council members. It said, and I quote, "The genetic deviants and evolutionary failures must be allowed to die as nature intended." Jake felt his hands clench into fists. He had always known that humans looked at things differently than most alien races, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. The idea that entire civilizations would throw away millions of their own people simply for being different made him sick. "Sir, what are we going to do?" asked Amy quietly. "Command has not responded to our reports yet, and these people cannot wait much longer." Jake looked out the window of his ready room at the vast fleet of refugee ships. Somewhere out there, millions of beings were waiting to die simply because their own people had decided they were not perfect enough. He thought about his own daughter back on Earth who had been born with a club foot. In human society, she was just a normal kid who needed a small surgery. In council space, she would have been marked as genetically flawed and cast out to die. The decision was easy. "Amy, send a message to all the refugee ships," he said, walking back onto the bridge. "Tell them we are going to escort them to Earth. Then send a message to command and tell them we are bringing home some new neighbors." Sir Rick said carefully, "We do not have authority to invite millions of aliens to Earth." Jake smiled for the first time in hours. "Then I guess we better hope humanity is as welcoming as I think we are," he said as he gave the order to prepare for the long journey home. The arrival of 3,000 refugee ships at Earth caused the biggest emergency meeting in human history. President Linda Hayes stood before the global assembly as reports came in from around the world. Every major city had people gathering in the streets to watch the alien ships through telescopes and binoculars. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing a decision that will shape our future as a species," President Hayes said to the packed assembly hall. "Captain Morrison has brought us over 3 million alien refugees who have been cast out by their own people. The question before us today is simple. Do we welcome them or do we turn them away?" Dr. Ben Rodriguez was already at work in the medical stations that had been set up around Earth's orbital platforms. The first thing that struck him about the refugees was how wrong the council had been about them. The Zephyrian refugees he examined were not weak or flawed as their leaders had claimed. Many of them showed signs of enhanced brain development that their larger cousins lacked. "This is incredible," Ben said to his assistant Dr. Carol White, as he looked at brain scans from a young Zephyrian female. "Look at these neural pathways. This individual can process information at twice the speed of a normal Zephyrian." Her people called this a flaw. The Luxari refugees were even more surprising. The crystal beings that had been cast out for having dim light could actually see parts of the light spectrum that their brighter relatives could not. When Dr. Rodriguez tested them, he found they could detect radio waves, ultraviolet light, and even some forms of radiation with their bodies. Commander Lisa Park had been put in charge of finding places for the refugees to live. She started by visiting small towns and cities across America to see if local communities would be willing to help. Her first stop was in Kansas, where she met with Mayor Tom Anderson in the small farming town of Riverside. "Commander, I have to be honest with you," Mayor Anderson said as they sat in his office looking out at the wheat fields. "My people are scared. We have never seen aliens before except on television. Now you want us to house beings from another world. I understand your concerns, Mayor," Lisa replied, "but these people have nowhere else to go. They are not criminals or invaders. They are refugees who were thrown away by their own kind simply for being different." 2 days later, Lisa got her answer. The people of Riverside had voted to accept 50 Corvin families. The Corvin were a mechanical race that looked like robots but were actually living beings made of metal and circuits. The ones in the refugee fleet had been cast out because their bodies had broken down or been built differently than the standard. The first integration happened faster than anyone expected. A group of Corvin refugees had been assigned to help repair some old farming equipment that the town could not afford to replace. Within hours, they had not only fixed the machines but improved them in ways that doubled their efficiency. "These Corvin folks are amazing," said Farmer Joe Miller as he watched. His old tractor worked better than it had when it was new. "They took one look at my equipment and started making changes I never would have thought of. They say they can help us automate the whole harvest." Similar success stories began happening around the world. In Mumbai, a group of Luxari artists worked with human designers to create buildings that changed color, based on the emotions of the people inside them. In São Paulo, Thektar healers who had been cast out for being too empathetic began working with human doctors to develop new treatments for mental illness. But the most amazing changes happened with the children. Human kids seemed to have no fear of the alien refugees at all. In playgrounds across Earth, human children were soon playing games with 6-armed Corvan youngsters and learning to communicate with Luxari children through patterns of colored light. 8-year-old Timmy Chen from San Francisco became friends with a young Zephyrian named Kresh who had been born without wings. In Zephyrian society, this made him completely useless since their culture was built around flying. But Timmy did not care about wings. He cared that Kresh could solve math problems that stumped high school students and could tell stories that made everyone laugh. Kresh is the smartest person I know, Timmy told his mother Sally Chen one evening after his new friend had gone home. He says his people thought he was broken because he could not fly. But I think flying is boring anyway. Kresh can do much cooler things with his brain. Dr. Maya Patel had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 5 years before the refugee crisis began. Now she found herself trying to explain to alien diplomats why humans had made such a different choice than the rest of the galaxy. Ambassador, Patel, the Council is very concerned about Earth's actions, said Ambassador Krex 9 of the Altarian Empire during a video conference. These genetic deviants were cast out for the good of galactic civilization. By harboring them, you are interfering with natural selection. Maya looked at the metallic alien on her screen and tried to keep her voice calm. Ambassador, with respect, we do not see these people as genetic deviants. We see them as individuals with unique abilities that their homeworlds failed to recognize. Unique abilities. Krex 9 repeated with what sounded like disgust in his mechanical voice. These beings are evolutionary failures. They weaken the gene pool and slow the progress of civilization. Actually, our studies show the opposite, Maya replied, pulling up data on her tablet. The refugees have already contributed to advances in farming technology, medical treatments, and architectural design. In just 3 months, they have helped us solve problems that we had been working on for years. The conversation ended badly with Krex 9 warning that the Council was not pleased with humanity's choice. But Maya did not care about the Council's threats. She was too busy watching the daily reports of success stories from around the world. In Detroit, the Corvan refugees had helped restart 3 closed factories, creating jobs for both humans and aliens. In Tokyo, a group of Luxari engineers were working with human scientists to develop new forms of clean energy. In London, Thektar telepaths were helping human psychologists understand how to treat autism and other neurological differences. The integration was not perfect. There were problems with housing and food and language barriers that made communication difficult. Some humans were afraid of the strange-looking aliens, and some refugees found human customs confusing. But slowly and steadily, the two groups were learning to live together. President Hayes received regular reports from Commander Park about the integration process. The news was almost always positive, but she knew that the real test was still coming. The Galactic Council had not yet responded officially to humanity's decision to welcome the refugees, but intelligence reports suggested they were not happy. Madam President, we need to prepare for the possibility that the Council will take action against us, said Defense Secretary Carl Johnson during their weekly security briefing. They have made it clear that they consider our actions to be a violation of galactic law. Let them come. President Hayes replied, looking out the window of her office at a group of human and alien children playing together in the park below. We did the right thing. Carl and I would make the same choice again. 6 months after the refugees arrived at Earth, the Galactic Council finally sent their response. A massive fleet of warships appeared at the edge of the solar system, led by the flagship of Ambassador Krex 9 himself. The message they sent to Earth was simple and direct. The human species will surrender. All genetic deviants immediately or face the consequences of defying galactic law. Came the cold, mechanical voice of Krex 9 over every communication channel on Earth. You have 7 days to comply with this order. President Linda Hayes called an emergency session of the Global Assembly. Representatives from every nation on Earth gathered in the Great Hall, while outside protesters filled the streets. Some carried signs demanding that the aliens be sent away to avoid war. Others held banners saying that Earth would protect its new citizens no matter what. Dr. Maya Patel stood before the assembly to explain what the council was demanding. The Altarian Empire has sent a fleet of 300 warships to our system, she said, looking out at the worried faces of the world leaders. They want us to hand over all 3 million refugees so they can be disposed of properly according to their laws. Disposed of, repeated President Hayes with anger in her voice. They mean murdered. Yes, Madam President, Maya replied sadly. The Council views these refugees as a disease that must be eliminated from the galaxy. They believe that by protecting them, we have proven that humanity is also genetically flawed. Secretary of Defense Carl Johnson stood up from his seat looking grim. Madam President, our entire space fleet consists of 50 ships. The Council has sent 300 warships, each more advanced than anything we have. If this comes to war, we cannot win. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some representatives argued that Earth could not risk the destruction of humanity to protect alien refugees. Others insisted that giving up the refugees would be the same as committing genocide. The assembly hall filled with angry voices as the world tried to decide its fate. During the break, HFY, the Zephyrian leader, requested a private meeting with President Hayes. The scarred warrior woman sat across from the president in the Oval Office, looking sadder than Maya had ever seen. Her, President Hayes, my people and I are grateful for everything humanity has done for us, HFY said in the English she had learned over the past months. But we cannot allow you to sacrifice yourselves for our sake. We will return to the ships and surrender to the Council. Like hell you will, came a voice from the doorway. Admiral Jake Morrison entered the room, still wearing his uniform from the emergency military meeting he had just left. HFY, you and your people are citizens of Earth now. We protect our own. Admiral Morrison, your fleet cannot stand against Council warships, HFY replied, shaking her head. We have seen their power. They will destroy every human city before they allow us to live free. Jake sat down next to the alien woman who had become one of his closest friends over the past months. Maybe our old fleet could not stand against them, but we are not using our old fleet anymore, are we? HFY looked confused for a moment, then her remaining eye widened with understanding. Over the past 6 months, human engineers had been working with refugees from all the different races to upgrade Earth ships. Corvin mechanics had rebuilt the engines. Luxari technicians had improved the weapon systems. Thektar telepaths had created new communication networks that allowed crews to work together like never before. You mean the ships are no longer purely human technology? She said slowly. Exactly, Jake replied with a grim smile. The Council thinks they know what human ships can do, but they have never faced ships built by humans and refugees working together. They are in for a surprise. The next day, Dr. Ben Rodriguez was working in his lab when he received an urgent message from the Zephyrian refugee camps. Several of the younger refugees had come to him with an idea that seemed impossible. Dr. Rodriguez, we have been studying Council military tactics for months, said a young Zephyrian named Vexka, who had been cast out for having an oversized brain. We think we know how to defeat their fleet. Ben looked at the group of young aliens who had gathered in his lab. There were Zephyrians with their enhanced minds, Luxari, who could see radio frequencies, and Corvin, who understood machines better than their creators. What do you have in mind? The Council fleets always fight the same way, explained a Luxari named Brightseer, whose dim glow had gotten her exiled. They use perfect formations and standard tactics that have worked for thousands of years. But they have never fought against beings who think differently. Vexka pulled up a holographic display showing the Council fleet positions. Their commanders are all perfect examples of their races. They think in predictable patterns, but we refugees have learned to think in ways our people never expected. What are you suggesting? Ben asked, though he was beginning to understand. Let us help plan the defense, said a Corvin named Build Different, whose asymmetrical body design had made him an outcast. We can see weaknesses in their formations that normal military minds would miss. Ben immediately contacted Admiral Morrison, who agreed to meet with the refugee volunteers. Within hours, Jake found himself in a planning session unlike any in military history. The room was filled with beings from 6 different species, all working together to find ways to defeat the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. The breakthrough came when Brightseer pointed out something that no human strategist had noticed. The Council ships all communicate using standard frequencies, she said, her dim light pulsing with excitement. But what if we could jam those frequencies and force them to use backup systems? The backup systems use older protocols that are easier to hack, added build different as mechanical clicks came from his asymmetrical body. If we could access their communications, we could turn their perfect coordination against them. Admiral Morrison looked around the room at the collection of beings that the galaxy had thrown away as worthless. Each one was contributing ideas that his best human officers had missed. This might actually work, he said quietly. Meanwhile, the Global Assembly had reached its decision. After 18 hours of debate, the vote was announced to the world. By a margin of 857 to 12, humanity had chosen to reject the Council's ultimatum. President Hayes addressed the world that evening as the Council deadline approached. My fellow humans and our new friends from across the galaxy, she began looking directly into the cameras. Today we face a choice between what is safe and what is right. The Galactic Council demands that we surrender millions of innocent beings to death simply because they are different. She paused and looked out the window where human and alien children were still playing together in the parks, despite the threat hanging over them. I say to the Council and to anyone else who would judge beings by their perfection, rather than their character, that Earth will not surrender. We will not abandon those who have found sanctuary among us. If the Council wants war, then they will have it. As the deadline passed and no surrender came, the Council fleet began moving toward Earth. Admiral Morrison sat on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by a crew that included humans and refugees from all 6 species. All ships prepare for battle, he ordered. Time to show the galaxy what happens when you underestimate the broken. The Council fleet entered Earth's solar system expecting an easy victory against primitive human ships and a collection of defeated outcasts. Instead, they found themselves facing something that had never existed before in galactic history. Ships that should not have been able to fly were moving in formations that defied every rule of space combat. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the EDS Unity, watching the enemy fleet approach. Beside him, Keithva studied the tactical displays with her enhanced brain, processing battle scenarios faster than any computer. Around them, the bridge crew worked with an efficiency that amazed even Jake. Humans, Zephyrians, Luxari, Corvin, and Thektar, all working together as if they had served together for years. Admiral, the Council fleet is maintaining standard attack formation. Delta 7 reported Lieutenant Amy Carter from her communication station. They are moving exactly as Vexka predicted they would. Jake smiled grimly. The young Zephyrian refugee had spent weeks studying Council military tactics and had correctly guessed how they would approach the battle. Signal all ships to begin Phase 1 of the plan. What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations. The human and refugee fleet began moving in patterns that seemed completely random to the Council commanders. Ships broke formation and scattered in directions that made no tactical sense. Some ships appeared to retreat while others charged straight at the enemy fleet. Commander Veltar of the Altarian flagship watched the human fleet with confusion. "What are they doing?" he asked his tactical officer. "This formation makes no sense." "Perhaps they are panicking, sir," replied the officer. Primitive species often lose coordination when faced with superior forces. Veltar was about to order his fleet to press the attack when the first surprise hit them. The scattered human ships suddenly turned and attacked from 6 different directions at once. But they were not attacking randomly. Each group struck at exactly the right moment to cause maximum confusion in the Council ranks. "How are they coordinating these attacks?" Veltar demanded as his perfectly organized fleet began to fall apart. "Our sensors show no communication signals between their ships." The answer was something the Council had never encountered before. Thektar telepaths on each ship were coordinating the entire fleet through mental links. The refugees, who had been cast out for having weak telepathic abilities, had learned to work together in ways their stronger cousins never could. Captain Rachel Torres commanded one of the human attack groups that struck at the Council's left flank. Her ship, the EDS Freedom, had a crew that included refugees from all 6 species. The Corvin engineer Build Different had modified their engines in ways that should have been impossible, but somehow worked perfectly. "Captain, we are getting massive energy readings from the Council flagship," reported her Luxari navigation officer Brightseer. "They are charging their main weapon." Rachel looked at the massive Altarian ship that was turning to target Earth itself. "All ships focus fire on that flagship," she ordered. "We cannot let them reach Earth." The battle for Earth became a clash between two completely different ways of thinking. The Council fleet fought with perfect discipline using tactics that had won wars for thousands of years. But the human and refugee fleet fought with creativity and teamwork that the Council could not understand or predict. Corvin mechanics had rebuilt human ships with configurations that looked impossible, but worked better than the original designs. Engines that should have exploded ran cooler and faster than ever before. Weapons that should have overloaded could fire continuously without stopping. The Council's perfect ships began falling behind modified human vessels that should not have been able to keep up. The turning point came when Captain Torres led a desperate attack on the Council flagship. Her mission was to disable the massive ship's main weapon before it could fire on Earth, but getting close enough would require flying through the most heavily defended part of the enemy fleet. "Captain, this attack run is suicide," said her human tactical officer, Lieutenant Dan Walker. "We will never make it through their defenses." "Maybe a normal attack would not work," Torres replied, looking at Kethva, who had joined her crew as a tactical advisor. "But we are not making a normal attack, are we?" Kethva's scarred face showed a fierce grin. "No, Captain, we are not," she said as she began typing commands into her console. "Bright Seer, can you guide us through their sensor blind spots?" The dim Luxari's light pulsed with excitement. "Yes, I can see the electromagnetic shadows where their sensors cannot reach. But the passages are very narrow and change constantly." "Build different, can our engines handle that kind of precision flying?" Torres asked the asymmetrical Corvin. "Captain, my modifications will allow turns that would tear apart a normal ship." The mechanical being replied with pride. "We can fly through spaces that Council ships would never attempt." The EDS Freedom began its attack run, flying through the gaps between Council ships like a needle threading through cloth. Bright Seer guided them through sensor shadows that only her unique vision could detect, while build difference engine modifications allowed impossible maneuvers that defied the laws of physics. "Council ships are trying to target us, but they cannot get a lock," reported Amy Carter, who had transferred to Torres's ship for the mission. "Their targeting systems are not designed for ships that can move like this." The Freedom reached the flagship, and Torres gave the order that would change everything. "Fire all weapons at their main gun." The concentrated fire from the small human ship struck the massive Altarian weapon just as it was about to fire on Earth. The explosion that followed lit up space like a new star and sent the flagship spinning out of control. With their flagship disabled and their perfect formations broken by unconventional tactics, the Council fleet began to retreat. Ships that had never known defeat were running from opponents they had dismissed as primitive and flawed. Admiral Morrison watched the enemy fleet flee and felt something he had never expected to feel. Pride in what they had accomplished, not as humans but as a new kind of civilization that included everyone who had been cast aside. "Admiral, we are receiving surrender signals from over 50 Council ships," reported Kethva from her station. "It appears that some of their crews no longer wish to fight." Jake was not surprised. During the battle, they had intercepted communications from Council ships where crew members were questioning why they were fighting to kill refugees who had done nothing wrong. Some of those crew members were probably genetic deviants themselves who had been hiding their flaws to avoid exile. The Battle of Earth was over, but Jake knew this was just the beginning. The galaxy had seen something new today. They had seen what happened when beings who were considered broken worked together with people who accepted them as they were. "Signal all ships to return to defensive positions," Jake ordered, "and send a message to any Council ships that want to surrender. Tell them they are welcome to join us if they want to be part of something better." As the smoke cleared from the battlefield, a new flag was raised over Earth. It showed hands and claws and mechanical appendages all reaching toward each other against a background of stars. It was the flag of the Alliance of the Outcasts, and it represented something the galaxy had never seen before, a civilization that measured its strength, not by the perfection of its best members, but by how well it treated those others had thrown away. 5 years after the Battle of Earth, the galaxy looked completely different. Admiral Jake Morrison, now in his 60s, stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station and watched ships from 40 different species dock at the massive space city that humans and refugees had built together. The Alliance of the Outcasts had grown far beyond what anyone had imagined possible. What started as a desperate defense pact between humans and 3 million refugees had become the largest and most advanced civilization in known space. The Council worlds that had once seemed so powerful were now struggling to keep up with Alliance technology and diplomacy. Dr. Maya Patel had become the Alliance's first Secretary General, leading a government that represented not just the original refugee species but dozens of others who had escaped Council purges over the years. Her office in New Geneva Station was always busy with beings from across the galaxy seeking membership in the Alliance or asking for help with their own outcasts. Secretary General, we have received another request for membership, said her Assistant Commander Lisa Park, who now served as Director of Integration. The Helix Empire wants to join the Alliance and they are offering to bring their entire fleet with them. Maya looked up from the report she was reading about new Alliance colonies. What happened to make them change their minds about us, Lisa? Their scientists have been studying our technology advances, Lisa replied with a smile. Apparently they finally realized that our hybrid Corvin human engines are 50% more efficient than anything they have. They want access to Alliance innovations. The Alliance's greatest strength had never been military power, though their unconventional fleets remained formidable across the galaxy. Their real advantage was innovation that came from combining different ways of thinking. While the Council races stayed locked in their pursuit of genetic perfection, the Alliance thrived by bringing together minds that worked in completely different ways. Corvin human engineering teams were building ships that could travel faster and farther than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Luxari artists working with human designers were creating architecture that responded to the emotions and needs of the people inside. Thektar empaths had revolutionized diplomacy by helping negotiators understand what their opponents really wanted instead of what they claimed to want. But perhaps the most important changes were happening in the schools. Commander Park spent most of her time these days overseeing educational programs where beings from dozens of species learned together. The Alliance had discovered something amazing about children. When young minds from different species worked together, they could solve problems that stumped adult experts. 10-year-old Bobby Martinez from Mexico City was best friends with a young Corvin named Clickwhir, whose mechanical body made sounds that other Corvin found annoying. But Bobby loved the musical patterns that Clickwhir's body made, and together they had invented a new form of art that combined human music with Corvin mechanical rhythms. 12-year-old Susan Wong from Hong Kong worked with a Zephyrian named Smallwing, whose tiny size had gotten him cast out from his warrior culture. Together they had discovered that Smallwing's compact brain could process mathematical equations faster than any computer the Alliance had ever built. The success stories went on and on. Alliance schools were producing graduates who thought in ways no single species had ever managed. These hybrid-educated young people were becoming the engineers, scientists, artists, and leaders who were pushing Alliance civilization to new heights every year. Dr. Ben Rodriguez, now the Alliance's chief science officer, regularly published reports that amazed even him. Maya, you need to see these latest medical breakthrough reports, he said during one of their weekly meetings. Alliance medical teams have eliminated 7 diseases that have plagued the galaxy for centuries. How did they manage that, Ben? Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. By combining treatment methods from different species that the Council races never shared with each other, Ben replied, shaking his head in wonder. Thektar healing techniques work perfectly with Luxari light therapy and Corvin mechanical prosthetics. The Council kept all these medical advances separate because they refused to let their species work together. The final proof of how much the galaxy had changed came during the new Galactic Assembly that met every year on New Geneva Station. Representatives from over 60 species gathered not as perfect examples of uniform civilizations, but as individuals with unique perspectives and experiences. Kethva, now serving as the Alliance's defense minister, addressed the assembly with words that were broadcast across the galaxy. 5 years ago, the Council called us broken and discarded us as failures, she said, looking out at the diverse crowd of beings filling the Great Hall. They told us we were evolutionary dead ends who would weaken the gene pool and slow the progress of civilization. She paused and gestured toward the viewing windows where Alliance ships could be seen arriving and departing constantly. Today, Alliance worlds are the most prosperous in the galaxy. Alliance technology leads in every field. Alliance diplomacy has prevented more wars in 5 years than the Council managed in 50. We have learned something that our former leaders never could understand. The hall fell silent as Kethva delivered the words that would be remembered throughout galactic history. The strength of a civilization is not measured by the perfection of its best members, but by how it treats those it considers least. They cast us out for being different, but difference was exactly what the galaxy needed. Jake Morrison listened from the gallery, surrounded by humans and aliens young and old, the perfect and the flawed. Around him sat the crews who had fought together at the Battle of Earth, humans who had chosen to welcome the unwanted, refugees who had found new homes among people who valued them for who they were, rather than who they were supposed to be. The Alliance had not just survived the Council's attempt to destroy them. They had built something better than the galaxy had ever seen before. A civilization based not on genetic purity or species superiority, but on the simple idea that everyone deserved a chance to contribute their unique gifts. As the assembly session ended and representatives from dozens of worlds mingled, together sharing ideas and forming new friendships, Jake thought about something his daughter had told him years ago. She had said that the most beautiful gardens were not the ones with perfect flowers arranged in neat rows, but the ones where different plants grew, together creating something more beautiful than any single species could manage, alone. Looking around the Great Hall, Jake realized that the Alliance had become exactly that kind of garden. A place where beings who had been thrown away as weeds had grown together to create something more beautiful and stronger than anything the galaxy's perfect gardeners had ever imagined. The humans had kept their ancient promise. They had given sanctuary to the tired, the poor, and the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And in return, those masses had helped humanity and themselves build a civilization worthy of the stars. The galaxy was better for it, and would never be the same again.